Welcome to Built on Air, a podcast and video series about all things Airtable. In this episode, we speak with Jen Rudd, an expert in building and maintaining cross-platform systems. Jen helps teams identify how their software and platforms can integrate with each other by first nailing down what the desired outcome is. She explains how this approach leads her clients to systems that meet their needs much more so than out-of-the-box solutions offered by some all-in-one platforms. Jen also specializes in automating repetitive processes, which is exactly what she's here to demo for us. Today's Airtable showcase explores Jen's base designed to track files and data across a placement agency's application process, utilizing a Zapier integration to automatically send emails to applicants as they advance through the process.
So this is my demo account. So I work with a lot of placement agencies. And so placement agencies have two different clients. They have the people who are paying for the referral of household staff mostly, like nannies and chauffeurs or housekeepers and things like that. And they also have people who are applying for these jobs and they're providing a matching service. So they don't have one client, they have two. So they have to kind of manage this interrelationship between the two different clients that they're working with. And so I thought Airtable, about a year and a half ago, a little bit more than that, I was looking for a way to have a nice, robust database that you could have unlimited users, or at least control what users have what access, and then also have an audit trail of who's doing what. So which is a very important concept in accounting. You want to know who posted what, so you can audit them. But also just to kind of keep track of who's doing what in a business, whether you have 2 employees or 100 employees, you kind of want to see who owns a file, who's owning that relationship, and kind of also seeing the interconnectedness between the applicants and the clients. So this is automated with Zapier. And I use Zapier for a couple different reasons, but most of it because the automations in Airtable aren't quite where they need to be yet.
Yeah, at the time of recording, they're still kind of new, 2 months old or so. They're great for little stuff, but I would agree, some new actions and a few little tweaks, but we won't get into that.
Exactly, because it'll probably be a non-issue comment.
Yeah, I could do a whole video.
Exactly, it'll be totally different in like 2 months. I'm not really worried about it. But the reason why I like showing off this space is because working with a lot of placement agencies, they actually appreciate the applicant tracking process. But also because one of the things that I'm really passionate about is trying to be as efficient with your time as possible. I'm a small business. Most people I work with are small businesses, no matter how many team members they have. They don't have a lot of time to waste on things that don't necessarily add value or add to their bottom line. There's a lot of things that you need to do during the day to kind of keep your business going and the engine running, but it may not necessarily be typing out an email and, putting perfume on it and sending it out into the world. You kind of just want to send an email and move on. So there's this concept of context switching, whereas like if an application comes in and somebody fills out a form on a website, you can have it flow into Airtable. And then once it gets in the Airtable, you can actually have the system say, if this person answers their questions a certain way, they're probably not a good fit for the agency. So we don't want to move forward with them. So we're not even going to bother looking at that file. So I'm not an employment law expert. So all of these questions, all of these are just, for instance, if somebody says, are you a US citizen or are you eligible to work in the United States? And they say no. Unfortunately, based on their agency criteria, they may not be able to work with them. So they can go ahead and put them into the probably doesn't work category. Or if they live in an area that's not very industrialized and everybody has to have a car and they don't have a car, and that's kind of a no-go for the agency, that might also be a reason why they probably wouldn't be a good fit. So you can have a system say, as the application comes in, say they're not a good fit just based on their application. Then if you're looking at somebody's application and they look great, you want to advance them to the next stage. Instead of opening your email, you can actually just change the status to schedule a phone interview. And through the magic of already running my Zaps, you can see that an email would already go out without me opening my inbox. So it's nice to be able to kind of work through, if you have 5 applicants per day, it's probably not a big deal, but if you have 100 applicants per day in a hot job market, it's nice to be able to kind of just go through everybody who applied overnight, move them through the system, and then move on with your day and start working with the clients or start working with the interviews that are already scheduled and things like that. I like inbox zero, so you can actually create inbox zero in your Airtable and have all of your communication automated. So that's one thing I really like about Airtable, just from a automation point of view and being able to not have to context switch between different software. And then also I like to be able to, the clients would also come in here, and then the positions. So if you are placing a lot of people at once, a lot of clients at once, you might have to keep track of all of the different pieces of information about each client. So you need to know about like what they're looking for. You might want to put information about what the job description is. And you can also keep, if you're updating your Airtable properly, you can also keep your website updated by just embedding tiles of the jobs with some pretty pictures. Obviously, not everybody is Mary Poppins, but you're able to kind of embed this into your website. So as you're moving people through the processes, you're moving the jobs and you're updating their statuses, you can move them on and off your website. Through the magic of all this stuff. So once the job is placed, then they wouldn't show up in their view anymore. It would go away from your website. Right. So again, you're not going to your website to update your job board. It just kind of gets updated by virtue of managing your jobs.
Yeah. Doing all of this from one place is, the goal, I would imagine, for most people.
Yeah. It's, if you can live in one place. So like a lot of people, when I talk to them, they're like, you have how many softwares running? I'm like, you have a lot of software, and your software costs, it's easy to spend a couple $100s a month on software, but you're not logging into 18 different platforms. You're actually just logging into one. So like if you're using Calendly, for example, if somebody books an interview with you or a client books a sales call with you, you can actually update their information as well. Just let your system know, because this person who's already in your system booked a call, you can advance them through the stages from schedule a phone interview to phone interview schedule. So again, you're not like capturing that information from Calendly. It's already updating your calendar, and it's already updating your database as well. So it's able to kind of flow that information properly because you have all of these systems working together.
And of course, with the process of going through and automating all of your systems, the beauty of it is technically you only have to do it once. Now, over time, you might want to, tweak things with your settings and whatnot, but, there's that period where you work out what needs to connect to what and how, and then you click run, and then it just, like you're saying, you don't log into 18, you log into Airtable, and then, change the status, and then your automation will take care of it for you.
Exactly. And I know that the laptop lifestyle is kind of funny currently, but it is nice. I mean, as a soccer mom, like it's nice to be able to do something from your phone, from Airtable, from the app, and like, looking at a record and just changing the status, and all these things, these fancy things happen. As long as you have an internet connection, it's nice to be able to run your business from anywhere if you have all these pieces in place and it's already automated and systemized.
I would have to agree.
So those are the positions. And then another thing that I have been toying with too, and I think it's interesting because you have the multi-resource app that you created in Airtable, which is so cool. It's nice to also have multi-resource scheduling is actually a big deal in the placement arena too, because you can't use Calendly for caregivers to schedule interviews with families, because it doesn't work. That Calendly or any of those booking software is connected to one calendar and one resource. So you can't have 5 families trying to book Calendly appointments with all of the caregivers, which would be nice because it would automate all the emails and do all the things for you. But you can kind of use that multi-resource concept in Airtable if you have kind of the tables working in concert. So what I did was I was trying to figure out how to have the clients give a couple different interview times and then allow the caregivers to pick from those available interview times and then follow up with them and let them know that the interview is booked and that, you know, where they're supposed to be once they've booked the time. So like in this case for this family, you want to ask them, okay, when would you like to meet? We're going to go ahead and say that they can meet on November 10th at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then we can also meet on the 10th at 2 p.m. Okay. So then you can have those pockets of time that the caregivers are able to schedule. And what you can do is then use this form here and send it to the caregivers. They put in their information. And then it books that time in Airtable for them.
Super cool. I flash of inspiration. I'm sure you've already thought of it as well. Have you considered making a script that asks caregivers generally what days are you available and generally what time, and then just creating those slot records for you based on that, like batches at a time?
Yes, I have thought about it, and I took JavaScript in college, and I'm doing my code academy very diligently in my free time. So I am learning scripting very slowly. So I think it's really cool. Like I figured out a couple days ago that I could expose the record ID, and then create a formula with the form and the record ID for the caregiver. And then they can fill in the record ID. And then I can use automations to update that linked record on another table, so that I don't have to use Zapier just to connect, you know, the availability form answers to the caregiver.
Yep.
Everyone probably knew that by now, but I was very proud of myself because that was like,
well, again, it's still fairly new, and it's not like JavaScript is the easiest thing to learn, especially when you have other things that you're doing and other things going on, et cetera, et cetera. My problem with being in a no code, low code space is that my brain immediately goes, oh, well, have you considered coding this with JavaScript? And that's not usually, you know, it's not always the best place for my mind to go. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, I always call it the rabbit hole. Like it's always something that like, oh, what if I do this? And then like, it's like midnight and I'm like, crap, like I haven't actually solved the problem yet, but I've drawn a lot of pictures and I totally get it. And I'm like in the API documentation, like I'm going to figure this out. And I'm like, and then they created an app that does that already.
See, well, sometimes it happens. It's important to build things for yourself so you can learn a new skill and have a deeper understanding of what it is you actually need.
Totally. And to your point about, you know, sending out notifications, I know a lot of people like to email. I'm probably on a little bit more email and Asana person versus like if you text me, like it better be good. Or if it's a Slack, like it's hard for me to be conditioned to read it. But I do see the value of sending text messages. And probably about 6 months ago, I discovered Twilio. It's my new favorite thing in the entire world, because you can send mass notifications to people with the information from Airtable directly from Airtable.
Yeah. Super useful, especially I know a lot of people use Airtable to kind of help manage their social media planning and whatnot. And this kind of dovetails into the idea of using Airtable to manage your kind of marketing strategy, and anything from giving people shipping updates for when they sell their products off. Very, very useful. And I see that a lot of people are utilizing Airtable's native integrations with Twilio, and then they also have a couple things for Slack as well.
Totally. And I was really, really happy that they finally added the automations to send the emails from Gmail. But as a Wisestamp user, I cannot handle the fact that the spacing in the markdown is double spaced, no matter how, like, it needs to be single spaced if you're going to forgo the signature. So I'm like, can you please add the signature? Because that's the only reason I'm still using Zapier for a lot of the emails now that I figured out the linking of the record ID. So it's so frustrating that like you can't send that beautiful signature that you pay a buttload of money every year for. Yeah. But like it's nice to be able to do some of that in Airtable, even if it's just a notification. And I've even had clients who are okay sending the Airtable emails because they use Office 365, and they're okay because it still looks branded, even though it's coming from Airtable and it says automations for Airtable. It's still a nice email that still looks professional, and it's not completely like a weird old notification that you got from some of the old software that was out there and stuff like that. So there is some value to it, but I do like having some of those easy to send out emails. I think the hardest thing that I've noticed for people is figuring out the filters and the views and how to use those to trigger the automations, whether in Zapier or otherwise. I think that's the hardest part, is really understanding how powerful those filters are, because I think someone was saying the other day that they liked a certain tool, but it didn't have, like they couldn't just, pick one record to do something with. It had to be like all of them. Like, well, you can just filter that particular name and that view, and then now you have.
I think I ran into the same question, and it confused me because I thought that's what they were saying at first. And then I was like, oh, but you can. So they can't be talking about that. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot that can be done already using some detailed sets of filters. But yeah, I mean, it's still new. And so people are still kind of trying to fully grasp, when does an automation run? When doesn't it? How quickly does it run? Et cetera, et cetera. The nuances between, as you were saying, the send email action versus send an email through Gmail action, which functionally do the same thing, but there's the difference is one comes with formatting, one doesn't. One requires a separate email account. One doesn't care which email account you use it for. So there's a lot that still needs to be kind of teased out amongst all of us Airtable users.
Totally. And I think another thing that I've noticed too is that's really helpful is like being able to use the last modified times and things like that. Because like in a CRM, for example, you want to have follow-ups that are not dependent on a human being. So like if a file goes cold, and it's like they used to call them like tickler files, where like if somebody has been sitting in the stage too long, you'd like to like do something to kind of kick the file back into action, even if it's just a follow-up email. So like sometimes like if you're requesting someone to schedule a phone interview and they haven't scheduled it yet, you want to be able to follow up with them. But you have to kind of know how to use some of the fancier fields in Airtable to be able to see when things happen. So like this one is like the last modified. You can use that as a filter. So if someone's been sitting in a stage too long, you can then trigger an automation, send out an email and say, hey, we haven't heard from you, what's up? Or, use that for an anniversary date or a birth date and things like that. Like, especially in a data-rich environment like recruiting, like you have all this information you're asking, like when you fill out an application, it's like 50 pages long, and it's because all these things are important for some reason, and people capture all of it and they just put it in a Google Doc, or it's just living somewhere on the back end of their website and contact form 7. Like why are you asking for all this information if you're not going to act upon it? Like, why don't you look at everyone's zip code and, geolocate people to see who's the closest caregiver, because the client really wants somebody who's in the same neighborhood. And you can do that in Airtable because Google Maps integrates.
Which is also very nice.
Which is super nice. And you can color code people based on statuses.
I was just thinking to myself when you were adding to the last modified field, it's one of those feature additions to Airtable that I really struggle to remember what it was like without it, even though it's not particularly old of a feature. My God, what a nice addition to have last modified and last modified by, which tells you who was the person who made that change last.
And I think the cool thing about it too is that because there is no audit log, like there's no place where you can see all of the activity that happened in your base at any given time. If you have the last modified date and the last modified by, you can create a view which just tells you, like you can watch it in real time, which is really cool when you see like 10 people working in Airtable at once and you just see the records flying in order. It's the coolest thing because you can see the last time somebody touched anything in that tab at least. So it's kind of cool to be able to do that and not having that last modified and last modified by. Like, how could you do that?
Right. Yeah, super useful. And if you do want audience, something that has a little bit more history of your base and how it's structured, On2Air actually does have a nice base schema package service. How to describe? On2Air, they'll show you everything that's happened to your base, basically ever. So if you need that log, you can possibly get one.
Yes, I just unwrapped it today because I have like a list of all these softwares that I'm looking through. And I just started looking at it and I was like,
it's pretty nice.
Yeah, I was like, all this cool stuff. I'm like, I need like a couple days. I need some time to like sit with this.
Of course.
I'm like blocked off at the end of the year. I'm like, I'm just gonna play with software for 2 weeks.
So I think, just to close out, since we're kind of on that topic, you're an expert in integrating Airtable with other things and other things with other things. Airtable itself has its own sort of niche of all of these different third-party integrations that are specific for Airtable. So for example, On2Air works specifically with Airtable and adds all of these great new features that aren't quite available with regular Airtable. There's also mini extensions who we've had on the show before, also very great. What do you kind of see in terms of the differences between integrating Airtable with, say, Google Calendar, to generalists, if you will, and integrating Airtable with something built specifically to integrate with Airtable?
So I think it really depends a little bit on who are you interfacing with in your Airtable. So if it's an internal interface, and I mean, I use many extensions, I've been using them for a while now, and they're great. I think a lot of the software to some extent, and I know that there's skins and makes it prettier and things like that, but there's a lot of integrations with Airtable that kind of improve the Airtable user's experience. What a lot of the software integrations I do is to help bridge the gap between an outside user and a business. So a lot of it is in the interfaces, making sure that an outside user doesn't know that you're using this really powerful software. They're just getting some emails and booking on Calendly. They don't know that you have like a report of who's dropping off at what place and have like a little pin board of where everyone's at. Like they don't need to know that. Like they're hiring you to do something and they get a couple emails from you and it looks seamless and it looks automated a little bit, but you're trying to make it feel like somebody is behind each and every email, kissing it and saying goodbye to it. So there are really cool tools that help improve your experience, and improving your experience is automating Airtable so that you don't have to go send an email. But you do sometimes have to use some other software that your outside users are used to, like Google Calendar or another, booking platform, because they need to be able to book on your calendar and not look at your calendar and use like the Google appointments and stuff like that. So you're trying to improve that piece. And then there's these really cool tools that do the heavy lifting for you and make it really easy for you to run your business more efficiently, but they're not always necessarily. I know many extensions, just from looking at them, they started doing a portal and things like that, so an outside user can update their record and stuff like that. So there are some things out there, but really it's about kind of having this organic experience for the outside user and then making your life as easy as possible.
Fair enough. I mean, as much as we on the back end, if you will, want to go to one place and look at one thing, the same is true of our clients or our end users, if you will. If you're trying to buy something from a store, you don't want to have to, traverse 3 different websites to buy one thing. So, to your point, the more easy you can make it for the end user at the end of the day, probably the better your overall system will succeed.
Totally. And I think that the biggest thing that I've seen a lot of pushback on is that, software can be expensive. Like if you look at the price tag of all these softwares, it can start to get overwhelming. But if it's saving you time and it's saving you from hiring that next person, it's worth every penny, because now you don't have those payroll costs or those contractor costs and things like that. And you have one less person to manage, because the software, while it's kind of dumb because it only does what you tell it to do, it does what you tell it to do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a person can make mistakes, and software is not perfect, but you try to make it as foolproof as possible so that you don't have that human error. Somebody can go on vacation and the business still keeps running.
Right. And that's why we do what we do.
You don't want to be dependent on one person, because if somebody gets run over by a bus tomorrow, then what's going to happen?
Yeah. And see, this is why we use the Twilio app to send the text for you.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for showing this. Is there anything, you have your own your own set of services. You also post about Airtable and other similar products. I'm going to let you plug, and then we'll put all of the links and stuff in the description below.
Okay, so I am moving to Adept Interfaces next year. It is the company that I work with that I am, but it's an agency, and we help businesses who are looking to scale and grow and make their lives more efficient, leveraging software and customizing the experience for you and your end user. You can also find me on YouTube with Adventures in Automation, where I unbox software. So if you would like to be on the hit list, let me know. But I do what I just talked about, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to use the software as a replacement for what I'm already using. Does it work? Does it not work? And what do I see that's cool about it, and what I don't see that's cool about it? So you can find me there on YouTube, and yeah, happy to, if anyone has questions in general about, if the software is good for them, happy to have a 20-minute conversation just to see, because, either you can fix what you currently have, or you don't have anything, and we can definitely help you get into the right place. Or, maybe you're doing good and you just want a second opinion, and I'm good for those too.
I'm sure you are. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and be sure to check out Jen's channel. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to give it a like or hit us up on social at BuiltOnAir. We always love to hear your comments and suggestions. And don't forget to subscribe to catch new episodes when they release. It helps us keep the podcast going.